Welcome to Gaia's Calling, where stories ignite your spirit and the earth whispers her secrets. I'm Brad Swift, a right-on-purpose author of eco-fiction and nonfiction, inviting you to become an eco-guardian. Together, let's explore the wonders of our world and take action to protect them. Listen closely. Gaia is calling. And today's Gaia's Call is about becoming a Trimtab for life on Earth. How small actions can help turn the larger system. And this is part 3 of Gaia's Call, One Cause exploration of mindset, motivation, and the regenerative future. So let's dig in. In part 1 of this series, we explored how the stories running in our minds shape what we believe is possible. If the narrative we carry says the future is doomed and nothing we do matters, our most likely responses will be withdrawal, anxiety, or quiet resignation. But when we step back and notice that those stories are interpretations rather than inevitabilities, we begin to reclaim a small but powerful space of freedom. We can choose which stories we continue feeding and which ones we begin to question. So, if that sounds interesting, you might actually want to follow this series and stay connected by subscribing. In part 2, we looked at something equally important, the science of motivation. Research suggests that people rarely change because someone else tells them what they should do. In fact, that approach often creates resistance. What truly motivates people is discovering their own reasons for caring and acting. When we reconnect with something we love, maybe a river we grew up near, a forest trail that shaped our childhood, a garden we tend with our hands, the desire to protect life, it arises naturally. So, what's one place or relationship that makes you care more deeply about the earth? And I'd love to hear your answer to that by subscribing to our chat. And there's a link on our Substack page or on the app for you to do so. Join the conversation with others exploring this path. I'd love it if you do that. Now, taken together, these two insights points towards something quietly revolutionary. If we change the stories we carry and reconnect with our own motivations for protecting life, the possibilities of meaningful actions begin to open. But there is still one question that many people understandably ask when they look at the scale of the challenges before us. And that question is, what difference could one person or even one family really make? This is where one of my favorite metaphors enter the picture. The architect and system thinking Buckminster Fuller, one of my heroes, used the term Trimtab to describe a very small device that's attached to the rudder of these really large ships. When the Trimtab moves, it creates a small change in pressure that helps turn the much larger rudder. Once the rudder begins to turn, the entire ship slowly changes direction. In other words, a relatively tiny input can help shift a much larger system. Now, Fuller loved this metaphor because it illustrates how complex systems often change. Transformation does not always begin with massive force. Sometimes it begins with small, well-placed actions that alter the direction of the whole. In other words, small actions can shift big systems. This might be exactly what someone you love needs to hear right now. So why not share this article? There's a button right there if you're on Substack. When I think about the ecological challenges facing our planet, the Trimtab metaphor feels especially relevant. Many people assume that only governments or corporations or global agreements have the power to influence the trajectory of the Earth's future. Those forces certainly matter, But history repeatedly shows that cultural change often begins elsewhere. It begins with shifts in how ordinary people live, relate, and imagine the world. And I say that's what's happening even now. Over time, enough of those shifts begin to alter the larger system. This is where the four great truths of the one cause framework comes into practical focus. These truths are not abstract philosophical ideas. They are descriptions of how living systems actually function. Interconnection reminds us that life operates through relationships. Sufficiency invites us to reconsider the assumptions that endless growth is necessary for human flourishing. Reciprocity reveals that life thrives through balanced exchange. And stewardship invites us to live as participants entrusted with care across generations. When we begin living with these truths in mind, even small choices can become trim tabs for a larger cultural shift. A family plants a pollinator garden in their yard, and suddenly butterflies and bees return. A group of neighbors organizes a repair cafe, extending the life of everyday objects. A school plants a small food forest where children learn how soil, water, and sunlight collaborate to create life. And someone chooses to support a local farmer, strengthening both community and ecosystem. None of these actions by themselves solve the climate crisis, but they begin changing the story of how we live on Earth. In my own life, I see small examples of this almost every day. When Logan and Piper, my grandkids, come to visit, we wander through the yard and the small food forest we've been nurturing here at the Loving Homestead. What begins as simple curiosity, digging in the soil, noticing worms, watching birds, quietly becomes something deeper. They are not just learning about nature. They are forming relationships with the living world. Moments like that remind me that transformation rarely begins with grand declaration. Instead, it begins with relationships, with soil, water, animals, neighbors, and children who still remember how alive the world is. So, what's one small action you've taken or could take that helps life flourish where you live? And I invite you to actually take a small action by leaving a comment about that right there on the button on Substack. Each of us can participate in this shift in ways both large and small. Some will influence systems at scale. Many of us will contribute more quietly through how we live, how we relate, and how we care. In systems language, these are trim tabs, small actions that help the larger system turn. So, if you feel inspired, begin with something simple. Identify a place or relationship that matters deeply to you. Ask yourself, why does this matter? What would I like to see flourish here? And what small step could I take? You don't need to solve everything. You only need to begin. Begin because when trim tabs begin to move, the ship begins to turn. So as we close this three-part series, I want to return to the simple experiment that began it. The stories we tell shape the possibilities we see. When those stories shift from despair to responsibility, from separation to relationship, we begin to see new paths forward. In a time when the challenges can feel overwhelming, perhaps the most powerful question we can ask is not, how do we fix everything? But rather, what is one small way I can help life flourish today? That question may sound modest, but history suggests it is exactly how great turnings begin.